Hello and welcome. My name is Carol Carter and I'm the founder and CEO of Global Minded. This is our launch today for Earth Week of 10 weeks of our virtual conference. So we're delighted that you could join us today. For those of you who aren't as familiar with Global Minded and what we do, we are dedicated to creating a capable, diverse talent pipeline to get more women, leaders of color, leaders from all different backgrounds, however you can define diversity, into the education, economic mobility, and leadership pipeline. So we have communities of practice across different areas, and the leaders you're going to hear today and tomorrow and Friday are from that leadership group in the area of energy, sustainability, and equity work as it laces through all of those different areas. So welcome, we're delighted you're here. This session's being recorded, and we will have it on our YouTube channel so that you can share it if you're a faculty person with your students or a business person with your colleagues who are interested in really being part of the solution to have more effective climate and earth capacities as we go into the next few decades. So with that, I would like to introduce the person who's really responsible for convening all these people today. And that's my colleague, Courtney Knight, who's one of our senior advisors for Global Minded. And Courtney, I just wondered if you could tell a little bit about your background. And we do a lot with first generation to college students. And Courtney has a remarkable story that I hope you will just briefly share so that you know a little bit more about why convening different stakeholders of all different ages and stages is part of how we can close the equity gap. Welcome, everyone, and welcome, Courtney. Courtney, we got to have you unmute there.
Thank you, Carol, and I'm honored and humbled to be able to introduce the esteemed members of our panel. I believe that we are at an inflection point of justice in this country. The events of this week indicate that we are at a moment of change, not just in criminal justice, but also in environmental justice. I was asked by Carol several weeks ago to think about a panel discussion for Earth Week, and it really brought it home for me. I live here in Atlanta, the city with the worst income inequality in the United States. It is where a median household white family has an income of $84,000 a year, while the median family income of a Black family is $28,000 a year. Likewise, the areas of the city that are predominantly minority communities suffer from some of the worst environmental conditions. On the historic Atlanta West Side, the Proctor Creek watershed is plagued with pollution, erosion, high bacteria levels, and regular stormwater flooding and sewage overflows. More recently, the EPA has found that these same neighborhoods are inundated with lead levels in the soil and the discovery of industrial smelting waste or slag. An example of, again, environmental injustice here in Atlanta. And I'm sure there are communities nationwide that suffer from the same conditions. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, on what is literally the south side of the river there, often called the south side of the tracks. And in Phoenix, we did not have access to fresh water. In many instances, we did not have access to modern electricity and other conveniences. I was blessed to be able to go through public school there in Phoenix. And by virtue of one high school guidance counselor saying, Courtney, you've done well, you can go to any college you want to in the country, in the world, I was able to go to Harvard College, first member of my family to go to college, and then later go on to the Stanford Graduate School of Business for my MBA. I've been working with Carol for the past several months, trying to connect her with my networks, trying to grow Global Minded. And I'm honored today again to introduce the members of the panel, beginning with Susan Kidd, who's the Executive Director of Sustainability at Agnes Scott College. Good afternoon, Susan.
Hello, thank you. I the reason I agreed to do this, there are two words that have been my words of the year during this year, this challenging year. One is gratitude, and I am so grateful for the leadership of everybody here today, individually and collectively, all of you that are listening, and just the critical nature of what Courtney talked about in terms of leadership for environmental justice. So my gratitude is strong to each of you. The other word is inspiration. And I have tried to take every chance I can to find that in a year that some days it's hard to be inspired. And I knew when Gwen Smith asked me to do this, that it would be a lot of moments of inspiration. And so I was really grateful to her for the request to do this and for the opportunity to be inspired by, again, all of you. I've been able to meet and talk to these panelists in advance, get to know my neighbors, Courtney included, and I'm just really inspired by all of you. So thank you. My job from here on out is just to be the moderator and to be sure that everybody jumps in and shares their stories, and that we stay on time, and that we gather your questions as we go. So we'll be asking you to periodically to just put your questions in either the Q&A or the chat, questions or comments, and with the Global Minded team and myself will be collecting those. And one last thing I should have said, of course, up front, is to thank Carol and Celeste with Global Minded for having this idea and doing these two workshops today and tomorrow. And I think we hope everybody will join tomorrow as well. But both for everything you do for your purpose, your mission, and for putting these on in particular. So thank you. Thank you. So we're going to get started. And the way, what we've all talked through and agreed to do is that each person now, they're going to introduce themselves, and I'll just call on you in the order that we've looked at together. And we'll let each person take a few minutes to both introduce themselves, because that really is part of this, as Carol asked Courtney to do. That's part of the story here tonight, is what each of these individuals has done to get them to where they are now, and what they do currently related to environmental justice and climate change. And then they're going to take a minute to reflect on environmental justice. What's their passion for that? Why? And what it is that what's important to them. So, and we're going to start with Eriqah Vincent with the Power Shift Network.
Thank you so much, Susan, my friend, and thank you everyone for having me. Thank you for the invite. I am so happy to be here with you today. And I am going to set my timer. So if you hear it go off, that's my timer, because I'm long-winded. And I'm well aware of that. I'm not delusional about my existence. So I'm going to set my timer so I can make sure that I respect the time of our other panelists to tell their own stories. Again, my name is Eriqah Vincent. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Network Engagement Director at the Power Shift Network. And Susan and the rest of the panelists, we all agreed that we would spend some time giving a brief introduction about kind of our professional work and our professional, bio, all the titles and the accolades and such. But then we wanted to have a deeper conversation and also talk about our story. And so with that being said, I'm going to spend a little time doing both. So my name is Eriqah Vincent. I live on unceded Miccosukee, Yukai, and Creek land in Lithonia, Georgia, as it's so called. And I am the Network Engagement Director at PSN. I am originally from Newark, New Jersey, or Delaware Indigenous land. And I've also lived in San Diego, California. So I have quite a few different perspectives when it comes to who I am in the work that I do and whose I am. And when it comes to environmental justice work, thank you, Courtney, when you opened up to talk about the week we've had. And I think that what's so important when it comes to my work over the course of the last, 2008 to now, so 13 years, is really the passion I have for working with young people, both having I am a young maybe I am a young person. I don't know. People don't consider me in my youth anymore, but I'm kind of in the weird middle. I'll be 33 in August. So, working with young people, both when I was a student organizer, I went to Spelman College. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in comparative women's studies and in 2010, and was working on student organizing there. That is 2008, 13 years ago. If you can imagine, certainly the environmental justice movement existed. I won't say that we started it. It certainly started, in the 80s with Warren County, North Carolina. But I think, and even before that with many other fights, but I think people weren't really talking about environmental justice and climate justice the way that they are now. It wasn't as mainstream of a topic. It was certainly getting there, but it definitely wasn't as mainstream of a topic in HBCUs, in not with that language, and in Black communities in general. I will say though, we often talk about bringing Black people into the movement, or people of color into the movement in general. Our families, our ancestors, our grandmothers have always been sustainable. They have always, kept plastic bags under the sink, or, we make jokes about, the plastic bags that you see in the sea, those aren't mine. My plastic bags are under my sink. Our grandmothers have always said, don't throw that out. We can reuse that, So even though we weren't utilizing that language, I have always been taught to save things, to reuse things, to, recycle things, just might not be using that language. So we've already been in the movement, and we've already been doing the work. And have always been connected to the land and connected to our environment, even if the language, the scientific language wasn't there. And I always say, the best subject matter experts are not necessarily the people in the room with the degrees. The best subject matter experts are Miss Mary and Miss Lucy and my grandmother, who is 97, Miss Susie, because they're the ones that live in the communities that do the work, and then been doing the work and watching over our communities for so long. So my career spans in working with the National Wildlife Federation, which is where I first met Susan when I was working on their campus ecology program, which is their student and youth program at NWF. And I also worked at the Partnership for Southern Equity for a couple of years as the Just Energy Manager. Now my work is beautiful and fulfilled and lovely as it was at those other two places as the Network Engagement Director at PSN. We have 98 member organizations across the country of young people who are working in climate and environmental justice. And my job every day is to make sure that they feel engaged, that they feel empowered, that I'm building power with them, that they have the hard skills that they need to showcase the knowledge that they already have. We listen to them and understand and want to know what they need from us and how we can be of service. And so I always tell the organizers that I manage that we are of service to our network member organizations. And our organizations span from a Yale student organization on campus to 350.org. And so one thing I love about working at PSN is that we have a range of organizations that we work with young people across the organizations who know what they're already doing, younger than me, Generation Z, I'm a millennial, and have so many bright ideas that are not crazy ideas or radical ideas. They're revolutionary. And I think that's what we need when it comes to the climate crisis and the environmental justice crisis, is revolutionary ideas that sometimes are called radical, but really are revolutionary. And then I'll just close up with the fact that, what does environmental justice mean to me? Why am I passionate about this?
So we've lost Eriqah. I don't know if you can hear us, but you are frozen on our end. We'll just wait a second and see if she comes back. And Eriqah, if you can hear me, you may need to disconnect and reconnect. Sometimes that works. So let's give that a try. And Celeste can be in touch with you directly as well. So what a great, I was really with her there. That point of revolutionary versus radical, that's really, this is the kind of inspiration I was expecting to hear. What an important definitional distinction she made. And what we'll do is we'll come back and let Eriqah wrap up. She was a good dividing point there. She can pick back up on her passion. But Gwen, that means that you are up next. Gwen Smith. Gwen, you're muted.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd like to say thank you to Courtney for inviting me to participate in this panel and assuring me that I did need to be involved. And thank you to Global Minded for putting this event on, this webinar on. And again, I'm just honored to be here. I'm going to do exactly what Eriqah did and set my timer because I can be verbose. So I'm going to go ahead and start that. Let me start by giving a little bit of who I am and what my organization does. My name is Gwen Smith, and I am the executive director and founder of CHARS, which stands for Community Health, Aligning Revitalization, Resilience, and Sustainability. CHARS focuses on environmental justice, economic health, education equity, and doing citizen science. Lately, we've been really focusing on working with youth and building intergenerational relationships. CHARS came about because of being involved with the EPA Environmental Justice Academy. I was in the inaugural class for that. And in order to be a part of that organization, to participate in that class, you had to get a letter of recommendation from the community that you were going to work in and focus on. And that community was the community that I lived in, which is Collier Heights Historic District in Atlanta, Georgia. Well, as I learned more about environmental justice through this class, I realized all of the injustices that surrounded Collier Heights community. We're looking at landfills, brownfields, truck stop, 2 different interstates on the sides of the community, on 2 sides of the community. And my heart just hurt. And I realized that somebody needed to be in place, or an organization needed to be in place to help the community address this. So as the organization, as the class moved along for the Environmental Justice Academy, one of our charges was that we needed to go out and teach other community members what we were learning, because the EPA Environmental Justice Division, our department, could not, they're small. In each region, which there's 10, they're very small. And so they wanted to build capacity in communities. And so I really took that to heart when I left the class. And so one of the goals of CHARS is to really educate community members to go out and advocate for themselves and to stand up when they're facing environmental injustices. As I moved through this, I realized that we needed to really reach back to the youth and bring them to the table and educate them about these challenges of equity, environmental justice, and give them the tools that they need to speak to these issues. And so that's really where the focus now is with CHARS. To give you a little bit of background about myself, I graduated from college in 2011. And so that's within the past 10 years. The college I went to is Agnes College, which is a liberal arts women's college in Decatur, Georgia. I will say it really changed my life and the trajectory of what I have done since being there. And between Agnes Scott and Agnes Scott and the Environmental Justice Academy, it has really, really brought me to where I am now. At Agnes Scott, I was a non-traditional student, also called a Woodruff Scholar. So I went back to college when I was 48. I'm sorry, when I was 44 years old. And I graduated when I was 48. And it just really changed my life. I ended up doing an internship in the summer of my sophomore year with EPA Region 4 in the Regional Administrator's Office, and was just exposed again to things about environmental justice. And that was the start of my advocacy. The next year, I interned with the Georgia Department of Public Health. And while there, I got to work in the chemical hazards department, childhood lead poisoning, and I learned so much. And that is where I began to deal with the different environmental justice issues. And the first one was radon gas. From there, I began to work with a organization, a sustainability organization called South Face Institute. And that was my last place of employment. And now I'm really focusing on CHARS and making it a 501c3. That is pretty much where I am right now. I am supported on where I am right now by my family and by my ancestors, and pushed to really move forward with this work and to not quit in the face of all the adversity as an African-American woman, as an African-American in the United States, and not to let those challenges get in the way of helping other individuals who have been academically tracked, who have been discouraged, those that are living in marginalized communities. So I'm really, really focused on those things, and hope to make my ancestors proud, which are my mother and father. And on that maternal side, my mother's name is Sylvia Ann Woodward. Her mother was Lydia White. Her father was Henry Montgomery White, and his father was William Jefferson White, the founder of Morehouse College. And with that background and that history, it is my goal to really help community members and youth who will grow up to be our leaders understand who they are, not to quit in the face of adversity, and to take their place on a level playing field. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Gwen. Again, another inspiration for me, and some things that even these two speakers who I knew have told me some things about themselves that I didn't know. So this is amazing to hear. So thank you. I think that Anamarie is next, and then Dana, and then we're going to loop back to Eriqah. So Anamarie Shreeves.
Hi, greetings. Thank you for having me today. I am Anamarie Shreeves, and I am the Environmental Education Programs Manager with West Atlanta Watershed Alliance, also affectionately known as WAWA, in the Metro Atlanta area. And I'll kind of just kind of guide myself through both pieces. One, to kind of give a background of how I got here. I initially, interesting, people always ask me what did I study in college, thinking that I have some kind of, or initially had some kind of natural science studies or background. And funny enough, I actually went to undergrad for journalism, which is, I still use those skills today, but it was after college that I really felt the need to dig into environmentalism in a real way. And it started with after college, having a job and wanting to, I guess some people might define it as a quarter life crisis, but going through a moment in time where I wasn't fulfilled. And I thought back on when were my happiest moments as in life, and they were always centered around nature. And it made me think, okay, maybe this is where you need to go. This is the route you need to take, is finding a way to connect your professional life with your personal interests, which happened to be this connection to nature. And then kind of fasting forward a bit, I started a blog, which was initially a blog about how to recycle hard to recycle items, think batteries, mattresses, refrigerators, and that kind of thing. And it led me to learn about the zero waste lifestyle. And I began practicing the zero waste lifestyle, and so much so that at a point in my life, I could fit 13 months of trash into a 32-ounce mason jar. And as an individual, you know, you're committed to something very strongly in that way that you could minimize what typically people would throw away in minutes into 13 months of trash. And that was wonderful, but it was also eye-opening for me to say, well, this is unfair to the individual to have to approach life in this way when business goes as usual, industries go as usual, and they get to make a tremendous amount of trash every day, whether it's disposal waste like landfill waste, but also the waste of energy, the waste of natural resources, the extraction of those things. And so I wanted to go back to school to kind of learn more about the infrastructural parts that surround the impacts we have on the environment. And last year I finished up my master's in geography at Georgia State. And at the same time, I was also working closely with Wawa as a contractor, just as an educator, because I purely love to teach in a non-conventional way, in an alternative way. And Wawa was definitely an outlet for me with that. And then it led to me working full-time with Wawa as their EE programs manager, where I now help and support with the environmental education programming at Wawa. Our programming is based on a cultural relevant, place-based pedagogy, which inspires you to have a safe space, you know, as we kind of highlight the this week and the trial of Derek Chauvin. We understand that the complications that are within our societal systems and how those things can impact us, but it also impacts the youth around us. And so what has been a big thing for me at Wawa is creating a safe space for youth to be able to have fun and play in nature, especially when nature has been deemed this wild, unexpected, unpredictable thing. They can learn as they use their senses and learn about cultural relevance of what people did throughout time while living and relating to the forest. And just really quickly, I'll kind of cover around EJ, what it means to me. Every time I think about environmental justice, I automatically think about the 17 Principles of Environmental Justice, which was named in 1992 by a group of people known as the People of Environmental Leadership at a summit. And their first principle is my favorite because it shines light on not just human beings, but every species has the right to be free from ecological destruction. It says that environmental justice affirms the sacredness of Mother Earth, the ecological unity and interdependence of all species, and the right to be free from ecological destruction. So in a time like now, it's important for us to think about, why does anything deserve to suffer, whether it's a cricket or a human being? And so that is what environmental justice to me, it means to me. It's this illogical freedom from ecological destruction, no matter where you are. And then why am I passionate about it? You know, the biggest thing for me and my passion around environmental justice is the injustice part of it, the suffering of anything. I think there's a fact out there of 20% of people make up 80% of the destruction, the ecological destruction in the world. And that 20% of people being well-off, privileged, financially stable, majority world people, or what some people may call developed world people. I like to call them minority world people because they make up a small population of the population globally. The majority world, on the other hand, make up 80% of the population, but only contribute to about 20% of the impacts on climate, the impacts on our environmental landscapes. And so that right there is what makes me so passionate about it, is that inequity. And until that inequity is completely addressed, my work continues. So that's all I'll share for now. Thank you.
So incredible. This is the first time I've had a chance to be in the same room, Zoom room, with Anamarie, and to learn about your background and to hear your thoughts. And it's very impactful for me. Thank you for that. I've been saying lately, if I could get one more degree, and I am not, it would be in geography. I'm envious of that. What a grand idea for you to go to Georgia State, woo, and get that master's. So fantastic. And great to hear your reflections. And the words that came out for me, many did, but the idea of a safe space, which I think is just so critical in every forum, right? Really, but particularly so in the outdoors, where there may be this oppositional thinking. So thank you for programmatically working on that. It's amazing. So I think we've got Dana Williamson next. Will introduce herself and talk about her connection to environmental justice, her passion, and then we're going to get Eriqah to do that portion of her introduction. So Dana.
Okay, so I have on headphones. Just want to make sure you can hear me well. Is this good?
It's would really
better?
speak up because it's just still a little soft. So just try to yell
I
a
can
little.
switch to larger headphones if you think that might be.
No, I
it's
think
gonna
that's
be good.
better, as long as that was really good.
Oh, that was better. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
So good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for having me, Global Minded. And thank you so much also, Gwen, in introducing me to this space. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today. So similar to the other panelists, I'll tell you a little bit about myself and my, I guess, expertise or my background, but also a little bit as to why my upbringing and why EJ is a particular area of passion for me. So I'm a behavioral social scientist by training, and I've been in the field of public health for about 18 years. And I received my master's as well as my PhD from the Rollins School of Public Health, Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. And so this is also the place where I spent many years as a program director focusing on community-centered research and practice. And currently I am an environmental health fellow hosted at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and I'm leading the program evaluation efforts there related to scientific integrity. But my affinity for environmental justice really began earlier in life, as I'm from Detroit, Michigan, which is a place that has a deep entrenched history of racism and redlining, and unfortunately plenty of egregious BJ issues. So I grew up in the 80s, and this was a time when what's most memorable for me, when Detroit was like on the forefront of their waste to energy movement. And we were one of the front runners with recycling garbage to create this underground power source for the inner city. And this was one of the largest incinerators in the world, and it emitted all kinds of nasty, horrible, toxic, and smelly substances, which we found out later were especially harmful for children. But as a child, this was kind of just a normal part of life for me. And to make bad matters worse, the incinerator was supposedly, or it was advertised as being this great benefit for the city, but they allowed all the surrounding suburbs to import their trash into Detroit. And they even extended these tax credits to suburban residents that were never given to the community residents that actually hosted the incinerator. And this incinerator, I believe, was developed, I think it was created around the 70s, maybe 76. And after decades and decades of protesting, the incinerator was finally closed in 2019. But this is really a classic example of a community of color being forced to carry the heaviest environmental burdens. And unfortunately, the residents that were there suffered from and continue to suffer from today the higher rates of asthma that are a result of pollution, cardiovascular problems, and kidney failure and cancer. And this is all a consequence of where you're living, what your socioeconomic status is, and largely what you look like in your skin tone. And these are the unfortunate circumstances of what we know is the reality of environmental injustice. But what was really one of the most surprising things that's still very relevant today, because Detroit is very near and dear to my heart, it continues to be one of the most populated, I guess, majority minority cities, with almost 80% being African American. But what isn't talked about so much is that the life expectancy of the folks that live in the city of Detroit is almost 10 to 15 years less than the average person living in the suburbs. And these are really the real impacts of what environmental racism looks like. So being from a city that has this history of inequities has really been a driving force for me to want to be this agent of change and uplift the voices of those that are most impacted and really advocate for changes. So from this, I guess, personal perspective, these are the experiences that have really grounded me, but they've really framed my professional orientation of wanting to be or stepping outside of what many may see in my public health perspective or my behavioral science perspective. But I'm more interested in being like a scholar advocate and centering my work around the community needs and focusing on equity. So from a professional standpoint, in the realm of environmental justice, I'm the lead evaluator of the US EPA's Environmental Justice Training Academy. So Gwen had mentioned this very briefly as being a part of the inaugural class. And so with this work, I am creating a greater understanding of how the program helps to build community resilience and teaches strategies to enhance a community's capacity to address their concerns. And so I focus a lot of my language around capacity, and you'll probably hear me say this many times in this space, because many of the communities that are experiencing the injustices are the same ones that are largely forgotten about or just kind of tossed to the side. They're overburdened with a lack of power, overburdened with a lack of resources, and many lack the control and decision-making that impacts the life and ultimately that impacts of their health. And this is one of the things that are one of the most prominent components in the principles of environmental justice. And so my focus is on what aspects relate to environmental justice, what aspects relate to having access and participation in this decision-making, and how we can enhance capacity with respect to knowledge and skills, and really building the power to solve many of the egregious problems that we see with respect to environmental issues. So from my academic lens, I focus on capacity building, as this is one way that I think that you can instill power back into the community. And you focus on leadership and you focus on arming knowledge and skills and resources. And in doing that, you can allow a community to pull from its resources from within to mobilize and fight back. And there's an opportunity for academics and community engaged researchers to support these efforts by aligning their research with the needs and the priorities of the communities in which they work with, by developing and enhancing capacity and enhancing community skills. So one example of this is I recently wrote a review article and I looked at the past 30 years of environmental justice research to get an understanding of how scientists like me were engaging with the community to address concerns and if they were enhancing any of the capacity characteristics that I feel are most significantly important. And what I found that there was really this large disconnect because many of the studies were utilizing these surface level approaches in engaging what I kind of think of as lightweight or really minimal with communities through participation and recruitment, which is fairly passive, offering financial rewards for participation, maybe educating within the framework of a forum, or even maybe even helping to create or extend partnerships. But all these are what I consider efforts that are more Band-Aid fixes, and they don't really have this long-lasting impact. And most of the studies didn't even advance any sort of policy or environmental change specifically as the communities may be needed. And so the studies didn't focus on community values and the needs of the community. The studies didn't focus on providing opportunities where the research could be used to leverage understanding like the wicked problems or root causes. The studies did not focus on understanding the history or maybe some of the underlying issues of inequity. And they didn't focus on building leadership in meaningful and sustainable ways, maybe once they left. So we all know that like communities that experience these higher rates of asthma because of pollution and less access to health facilities and fewer resources are the ones who are impacted the most by our climate crisis. And I really think that by me having this, bringing this conversation forward, that it really provides the opportunity for new leadership with a focus on the community, where I'm also encouraging a focus on equity and the elimination of some of the horrible policies that don't focus on these important components. And this is largely where I also see the overlap of climate justice and environmental justice and the ways in which younger people can be engaged. You know, often leaders and residents of impacted communities have a limited understanding of environmental laws and regulations. And they may not know exactly how to best advocate to address environmental justice. And even there's an emphasis through my work, I try to focus on really pushing for the community-led efforts that are needed to change the social fabric and the institutional structures that really support these inequities. And so the passion that I see with young leaders through like the Sunrise Movement and other efforts are ways that I feel like this group is able to assert and insert themselves into environmental justice issues. And it really gives me a lot of hope or great hope for what I consider to be change that's hopefully on our horizon. And so I'll end with my, I guess, opening comments there, but I really look forward to our discussion today and even our conversation that we can have with our virtual audience and figure out how we can push forward and take more steps towards the positive community change and environmental changes that we all want to see.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williamson. You had me at scientific integrity at the beginning, but then you went so much more expansively into capacity building and leadership skills. And I remember early in my career thinking about assisting in various communities and how access to information and access to assistance is so key to that capacity building. And it's obvious that you, and I think really all the speakers have a role in that. That's, you know, it's really an incredibly important role to provide access to resources and build on resources that exist. So thank you for underscoring those important elements of community work. So we're going to loop back to Eriqah. You were just starting to tell us about your passion for environmental justice. And we'll let you do that. And then I'm going to start asking some questions. So back to you, Eriqah.
Yes, and of course, I haven't had a power surge in months, and then it happened right at this moment. So please excuse me, I apologize. And I set my timer for 2 minutes, so I'm gonna be quick. So talking about, I guess that's a good place to start off. So when it comes to environmental justice, when I caught the bug in college to really start thinking about this, and I did extracurricular activities while I was studying comparative women's studies officially. And I was a part of a student organization that's actually chartered at Morehouse College. And if you're familiar with Atlanta, Morehouse is right next door to Spelman, along with the Clark Atlanta, the ITC, and Morehouse School of Medicine makes up the Atlanta University Center. And so I joined the organization at Morehouse and started to get really passionate about community work and environmental justice work and what that meant for us as a society. And I used to say that, I don't use my degree in any way in my work. And that's so not true. I think that a huge part of my work and something I'm really passionate about is the way that Black women's voices are uplifted in the work, having been, the keepers of community, the keepers of stories, the keepers of culture in our communities. And so I am inspired by Dr. Wangari Maathai, God rest her soul. I am inspired by Majora Carter. I am inspired by all of these women who came before me and who are still doing the work. Anamarie works at Wawa. Dr. Nataki Osborne-Jelks is my dear Spelman sister and love and mentor. And I'm inspired by these women who are doing the work from the lens of culture keepers. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm passionate about this work, is just the inspiration and also the inspiration, I should say, of younger Black women who are coming up, who are younger than me, who have far more amazing ideas on the environmental movement and EJ work than I did when I was 19 and 20 years old. And I'm inspired to speak with them and help them amplify their voices. But I think also what has made me more passionate about this work is the intersectionality of the work and how it intersects, Courtney, I was saying before I got cut off, Courtney mentioned in the beginning about the verdict that came down yesterday, and 30 minutes before that verdict, a young woman was shot and killed by police in Columbus, Ohio. And so I think that what also inspires me is the intersectionality of the work: equity, racial injustice, gender justice, LGBTQ plus rights, the rights of people to have housing and water and feel safe. And that's not something we always do fantastic in our society, not only in America, but around the globe. And then thinking about, to be honest, what world are we keeping for our children? Sustainability is, how are we sustaining our world for our children? And myself have currently being 6 months pregnant. That is something that I think about a lot for my daughter, is how am I keeping this world for her? And how will I inspire her as she grows to continue to do this work? Gwen so lovingly listed her ancestors, and that's something that's very prominent in the Black community, of remembering our ancestors. And my mother, Kathleen Williams, who works at Wawa, was an advocate herself since high school. My grandmother's never taken any mess from anyone, and I don't think my great-grandmother did either, from the stories I hear. And so I am inspired by the women in my life and by the women who I work with, and especially the communities I work with and the young people I work with, to continue the fight. Because I will say in closing, oftentimes, making sure that young people have project planning skills and, have the technology they need to amplify their voices doesn't always feel like I'm helping, the Gulf not lose football sizes of land every 90 seconds. But at the same time, doing that work is fulfilling for me, and hopefully it's creating a chain reaction that can be positive to combat climate change and environmental injustices that we've seen.
Wow, amazing notes to leave us on for this opening part of the session. And Eriqah dropped a news bomb there about being pregnant. Congratulations. I didn't know that. So excited for you and us. I love babies. So babysitting, but also you've all been making me weave in thinking about my family as well. And I just was reminded of my mother, who whenever I would get a new job in the nonprofit sector, she would always just say, well, just give me your business card, because I don't really understand what you do. And then usually she would be like, I'm still not sure I understand what you do. But finally I hit the job that had the word advocacy in it. And she took one look at that and she said, finally somebody got it. That is you. And I think that is all of us today. It's at the heart of what we do, is this advocacy work. So thank you all. So I'm gonna jump in, and Gwen, I'm gonna toss you the first question. So if you are you ready? So, and are you unmuted?
I am all set.
Great. So the first question, and this everybody is gonna answer this one, but it's really, what can you do as a leader in the environmental justice arena to stimulate young people's views of educational opportunities and careers that are going to contribute to this change that that we've all been talking about, the importance of change and youth engagement? And what can you do, or what are you doing? I think we decided as a group it could be either one of those. So,
well, I'm going to start with a little bit of all of it. Let me start by saying that education is important, that I was tracked as a student. So when I graduated from high school, I did not know where a sentence began, where I should put a capital letter, where it ended. And I didn't know math. I failed college algebra 4 times. So what I did learn when I went to Agnes College was why that happened. And it pained my heart. It was racism, clear as day, that I ran into here in Georgia and in Arizona. So when working with youth in the community, what I understand is that that field is not level. And when I'm speaking with youth and African-American youth, what I can do is let them understand that I understand what they're going through, because I've been there and I know what it feels like to be in a classroom and be failing the class and knowing that other people know that you don't know, and not being able to answer the questions, and how that makes you feel less than. And taking that and making action out of it, it made me realize that I was as smart as anybody else in that classroom, but I didn't have the tools. And so that takes me to think and explain to the children that someone else that has more money or more education doesn't make them smarter than you. You just haven't had the same access or opportunities. And I started to, when talking with the adults and explaining this, some of the inequities that exist are, if you're in a socioeconomic situation where the parent can have a bring your child to work day, that child gets exposed to a work environment and opportunities, and to have ideas about things that they can do. They also get to network with people that their parents work with. Now, if you go to someone who comes from one of those low income earning families in Atlanta, and if the parent brings the child to work, it's looked at as, well, what's wrong with this parent? Can they not manage their life? Why are they needing to bring the child to work? And they cannot bring the child to work on Bring Your Child to Work Day. And so, that child doesn't have the same access. If a parent has a cocktail party, their children are running around. They get to know their parents' friends. And how does this translate? This translates to when summertime comes and you need a job, If your parents have friends that can give jobs, that's a wonderful opportunity. It translates into when you graduate from college, you have opportunities for work and internships while you're in college. I had a friend who was a vice president with a major bank in their brokerage area. And it was explained to me that she had the opportunity to help choose people to work at this brokerage firm. And the African Americans, she was choosing top African Americans, but they could not bring the money in because they didn't have the relationships. Whereas if you have family friends that are willing to deposit $2,000 or $4,000 or $10,000 for you to start, then you've got a good start to your career. But if you don't have those connections, where's that opportunity? Now, let me bring that back down to the youth in our community and what can be done. You got to make those connections available. So some of the things that CHARS is doing right now, for example, I recently worked with Anamarie. CHARS partnered with Wawa, and we did a program called It All Happens in the Watershed. Anamarie and I met. I shared with Anamarie some of my ideas about working in Jenny Drake Park in our community. And I shared with her my feeling that, and we had some, after talking, we were like, yes, we're on the same track. I think that children ought to have fun in learning. CHARS started the Environmental Health Outdoor Classroom in order to do that. When you're in a square, when you're in a box and you go to school and you've been told you're not smart, when you're failing the class, when you don't understand what's going on, how are you going to have a love for math and science? But if you take them outside of the classroom, that's a whole different story. So CHARS does things outside of the classroom, involving adults in the community so we can begin to get that relationship between adults and kids again, that intergenerational relationship. So Anamarie and I work together. And Anamarie, you can unmute your mic now if you want and join in and pitch in or jump in whenever you want on this. But what we did was worked on explaining what the watershed was, which is Sandy Creek Watershed, in Jenny Drake Park. And the kids actually wore waders. And if you don't know what that is, think about people fly fishing out in the river and they have on those overalls. Wawa purchased overalls in the size of each one of those children. And those, Anamarie, every Saturday, 40-degree weather, these parents and Anamarie and I and other volunteer adults from the community went into the creek and they learned about turbidity. They learned about the different levels of soot and water. They literally picked up macroinvertebrates, and we watched something eat something else. I don't know what it was, but at the end, something that CHARS is passionate about is having the children present in an academic way what they've learned. And Anamarie has such a gentle spirit. She worked with these youth and they did a poster that they were helped with by an artist. And this is this interdisciplinary thing that CHARS believes in, which is we want artists to be involved with the students. We want the adults to be involved with them. We want scientists to be involved with them. And we want to, partner with the city and different organizations so that these children can see different career opportunities while having fun doing it. And they did this presentation, and these kids stood up and spoke so eloquently about things that they didn't know prior to this. It was amazing. So I believe that what I can do is to continue to do that, give children leadership roles. CHARS is starting a club, and the portion of the club is to let the kids create this, for them to be leaders, and then to continue to do citizen science work and projects like that, which we have more coming, and I'm going to cut myself off so that some of the other individuals can have an opportunity.
No, that was perfect story and answer. And I think we will get Anamarie to go next, both to pick up on the example and, to elaborate or to choose something different to talk about. So.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely to add on to what Gwen mentioned, I think the biggest thing that I can think of as far as what you can do as a leader in the environmental justice movement to stimulate young people is to make it fun. I mean, and that is really the biggest priority for me. Anytime I go into programming with youth, and that can be toddler youth, that can be young adult youth that's between the ages of 18 and 24. Is trying to figure out how to pique interest. I think we're all we're natural learners. We just have different styles. Some of us are visual learners, some of us are more oral or auditorial learners. And so kind of being able to have something that relates to people is huge, which brings me to my next point is just around relatable. How can you connect to whatever it is that I'm trying to teach? So Gwen gave the example of Sandy Creek, and this is the creek that these youth utilize, or the water that would go through this creek flows into their houses instead. And so you see that connection and you almost get this visualization in the middle of the park. And so that was something that we were able to do. And using the senses was also very helpful for that group as well, where Gwen mentioned, they got to witness predator and prey relationship as they saw a salamander eat a worm, a river worm or creek worm. And so those are just some examples of how it becomes fun, because we're not just going to kind of stick to a script in anything that we do. We're going to pause and recognize the wildness of the experience. And so that could mean, okay, we're having a conversation about macroinvertebrates, but now we're seeing a salamander eat a earthworm, and we have to pause and talk about predator-prey relationships. And another example could be connecting youth to pertinent conversations. Right now, I work with a group called Gangster Growers, and I'm their Earth Stewardship instructor, sustainability instructor. And we've had conversations where we dig into what people are seeing with COVID, some of the impacts of COVID, whether it's people's lights are being turned off, or the discussion on how evictions will be covered or not covered over time. And we get to have these dialogues, and how does that relate to who's going to get the next public commissioner seat, So these are different things that I'm able to have conversations with them about in real time. So we're looking at current issues and then connecting it and making it applicable to their lives. So I think, the biggest one for me is definitely to make it fun, but also fun factor could also mean that it's accessible, whatever it is that you're trying to convey or speak on is accessible to people. A lot of times people can't conceptualize some parts of environmentalism. I talked to my grandma about being a zero waster, and she's like, okay, I don't get the big point, because she also grew up during the Great Depression where people were naturally zero wasters. And so big deal that, you're figuring out how to preserve your trash. Another thing is to be relatable. Again, I mentioned the reference of talking about the public service commissioner seat and how that connected to people's energy or Georgia Power being turned off. But then another relatable thing could be with the same group of youth, the Gangsters to Growers youth, who many of them are formerly incarcerated youth who are now going through an agribusiness program. It was important for me to figure out, how do I connect environmentalism to their world? And so we talked about war. We could talk about gang wars, two local gangs up against each other. Why do they go to war? Why is there a war in different countries? We could talk about those things and say, okay, what are they fighting for? They're fighting for natural resources, whether it's land or it's coal or it's gold. These are natural resources. And so that was a way that I was able to make it relatable. And then another one is just how is it applicable? So another point is, how does this connect to me? What's in it for me? That's everybody's kind of spiel, as it should be. But what's in it for me? Why is this important to me to have a dialogue about, tadpoles spawning in the middle of the river? Well, let's talk about the benefits of having amphibians and what do they do for the water and how do they help to support the ecosystem? So those are some of the big things that come to me as far as stimulating young people's views within the environmental justice arena, and then just kind of getting them more on board with environmental change.
This is great. I'm so glad this is being recorded because I'm a note taker, but I can't keep up here. But just the thinking about access, relatability, and making connections, and then this aspect of having fun. I mean, it's, it really is. I know we have a faculty member teaching a course this semester on public health and environmental communications, and I know that course has been a little bit sometimes of a drag because you're thinking, oh, I've got to tell the bad news to multiple audiences. But she had her students do a stand-up comedy routine. So they all wrote a stand-up comedy routine, and some of them performed it. And I thought, this is the way we transition. They may never do that exact thing again, but the idea is to get out of the box, right, and think in relatability and in fun. So thank you both for that. So I'm going to ask if Dana or Eriqah, do you want to comment on this question about what you can do as a leader environmental justice arena to stimulate youth, and let either one of you go next?
Sure. So I'll, as a caveat, I guess I'll say that I'm very much an academic. And so while my work doesn't always allow me to directly engage with communities, it absolutely impacts community efforts. And so in talking about what I'm currently doing, I can uplift the work of the EPA's EJ Academy. And so this is when I became involved with this project independently, and I have served in the role as an independent evaluator. I'm currently a fellow at the EPA, but I'm not technically a government employee. So I still am able to look at the Academy and my efforts and my involvement from someone that is not directly affiliated with the program. And so I'll say all of that because I really feel like the Academy is a dynamic leadership program. And I've had the honor of being involved with it as the lead evaluator. And this is also the program that Gwen mentioned that she was a graduate of in the inaugural class. I think that was 2015 or 16. And they're really exemplary because they center the needs of the community and they build capacity around like making policy change and systems change and environmental change. And the program helps to train leaders to think and partner, I guess, strategically. Also empowers them to have active voice and create like a shared vision with those that are in their immediate neighborhoods and in their immediate communities. And so this is an approach that I feel like is so critical because it really centers the priorities of the community and helps the individuals that are involved with the Academy identify a structure and goals and objectives and make incremental approaches to creating the solutions and whatever it is they're trying to change. And so, from a youth perspective or just from younger generation, I think that, or generally people are angry and they may not always have like the emotional intelligence skills to best navigate the best way to address the things that they're passionate about. But the program actually focuses on appreciative inquiry as well as emotional intelligence, where you can look at challenges from an asset-based approach instead of like a deficit approach. And these are like some of the really foundational leadership skills that everyone can benefit from. And those that are especially interested, that are younger in environmental justice and where they can find their footing to develop leadership skills, I feel like the Academy is a great start. And the program doesn't have any age restrictions because I feel like the curriculum that they provide can really instill leadership across all age groups. And it provides opportunities for networking for those that maybe don't have a solid network, creates opportunities for partnership. And so my role as an evaluator is that I'm uplifting this program specifically because I'm assisting in identifying their best practices, what they're doing well, and helping them scale up the program so it can be accessible for communities nationwide. And so again, while like I'm not the one that's directly involved with the community, the work that I'm doing is helping to uplift a program that I feel like is a great opportunity that can help others similarly to elevate the skills that even Gwen acquired through the academy to assist them in addressing some of the issues that they want to see changed in their community.
That's so great. It's such a grounding program. I will have to tell you, I don't think I've had a chance to ever tell this to Gwen or anybody at EPA, but a student walked in my office at Agnes Scott College. It had to have been 2 years ago because we haven't been there for the last year plus. And she said, I would like to work on environmental justice in the Center for Sustainability. And she's ended up rewriting our mission statement in a team effort to make it more fully representative of environmental justice. And we've got now a program tied to our Office of Inclusion, of Diversity and Inclusion, that's going to maybe result in a joint internship. She's done a lot of work. And at some point along the way, I said, how did you get started on this path? And she said, I went to the EPA's Environmental Justice Academy. And I was like, this was probably, she was probably 18 or 19 when she signed up. No connectivity through the sustainability office at Agnes Scott. So, and she's amazing. So there's a youth story tied to that academy for just in one. I'm sure there are many more. So Eriqah, did you you obviously spend all day, every day with young leaders, right? So want to comment on this question?
Just really quickly, there's not much more to add. Folks have had such great things to say. I'll say that, I think it's great on this panel. We have some folks who work with younger children, with Anamarie talking about the amazing work that Wawa does in their elementary school kids. And also, I know that Wawa also has interns that are in college as well. But, I think a lot of the young people that I work with kind of are on the other side of it, either in college or just out of college, trying to really figure out what they're doing. So I think that having programs like the ones at Wawa, like the ones that Gwen and her organization are establishing are great, because once they get to the age where they're working with Power Shift Network or organizations like ours, they have the basis and the foundation of the learning and the appreciation for our ecosystem, for how we're all connected, for how it's necessary for all of us to protect these ecosystems, both, in our forests, on our beaches, on our plains, on our mountains, and so on and so forth. And so with that being said, I think on this side of the spectrum, once they have that, and not everybody has that, let's also be clear that not everybody, it's just now that school districts are really starting to teach about climate change and environmental. And there are a lot of school districts around the country, state and local school districts, that are pushing back against teaching that. I was so proud of my home state, New Jersey. I think there was an article about New Jersey implementing climate change in elementary school and in the school system, and teaching about that. So I was so proud of my home state, New Jersey. Georgia, we'll get there. But I think that what I wanted to say is, at this juncture and at this side of the spectrum, when it comes to working with young people, I think that it is important for us to listen as we are stimulating their learning opportunities, their education opportunities, and their careers. I think it's a lot of young people get dissuaded or jaded about doing this work professionally or doing this work in any capacity. We had a career panel. We had some career panels last night. We're in the thick of our major Power Shift convergence right now. 1,000 young people from across the country are going to a virtual convergence. So that is, you know, in and of itself a feat, with PowerShift convergences typically being in person. But we had career panels last night. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to talk about regular careers that folks don't necessarily think of, that aren't necessarily nonprofit and, you know, community organizers or advocates or the work that I do. We had a panel on lawyers. We had a panel on authors and journalists. One of my best friends was on that panel. We had a panel on, you know, artists and designers and architects and engineers and all these different things. I think I said lawyers already, educators. Dr. Nataki Osborne-Jokes was on the educators panel. But I say that to say, you know, as we're thinking about careers for these young people, listening to them, understanding that they have their own ideas, and a lot of times their ideas are much better than ours, and encouraging those ideas with hard skills, with resources. That doesn't necessarily mean money, but when we're uplifting them and when we're encouraging those foundational pieces, then they can be propped up to really feel inspired to build power within themselves and within their own communities, and therefore want to stay in the work, because they definitely get jaded and then don't want to stay in the work, and, you know, we lose them to a lot of other of these other industries that aren't necessarily environmentally focused or don't have an environmental lens. So I think that swell of holding them in what they know, and inspiring them to utilize that and giving them the tools that can amplify their already brilliant minds is so important. And ageism on both sides in the environmental movement is very prominent. And I think we really need to start listening to our young people who have that knowledge and the revolutionary ideas.
Fantastic. No, definitely. It took me a while being on a college campus since I'd been working in nonprofits to begin to realize how the students were the teachers, and the roles just reversed for me at some point. And it's been an incredible job since that awakening for me. So listening is so critical. Well, I told y'all this time would go fast, didn't I? We're speeding toward the end here, and I don't think we have any questions from the audience. So what I think we'll do is, I had promised y'all that we'd go around and let everybody say, you know, sort of a wrap up thought, something they didn't get to say yet. But if I could ask you to think about that in light of one of our questions about how dealing with environmental justice will help us move forward on climate resilience and solutions, so that we do make this tie that was purposeful for tonight's event. So am I ask, is that too many layers? Just sort of a final remark and tie in climate change. And then we want to be sure to loop back, let Courtney say anything if he has anything he wants to say, and then Carol will be our final wrap up. So how about if Eriqah, since you were talking about, you sort of shifted to climate change about using New Jersey as an example. So would you go first on your sort of final thought?
Yeah, and I'll also try to loop in what you asked, Susan, about, you know, how are we addressing environmental injustice moving forward towards climate resilience. I think that and also my colleague and friend Michael Black asked a great question about how does identity and history help you connect with communities you work with. So I'll try to do some of a little bit.
Thank you for seeing that. Go
quickly. I think that, you know, these are such big questions, but such poignant questions about how are we thinking about resilience and climate solutions. And I think that resilience, you know, climate change is already here. You know, I think what we have to continue to do is start telling people and speaking to people like it's already happening. It's not a thing that, you know, it's coming in the future. It's happening now. And the reason why a lot of folks are still thinking of it as a distant future type of situation is because they're not in communities where it's hitting them the hardest in the beginning. You know, our coastal communities, I was on a panel the other day, and the folks in New Orleans, which our conference is focused on New Orleans this year, were saying, I think every 90 minutes they lose a football field of coastline. You know, and I watched a video the other day as we were trying to figure out some things to add into the conference. And I can't remember the name of the city in Louisiana, but, you know, they were saying, you know, some of the kids that go to school, they were saying, I want to live here my whole life in this bayou town. And they were, you know, their parents were saying, or some of their grandparents were saying, in 50 years, this town might not even exist. You know, it might be underwater. And there were places that their parents had recognized that they used to hang out at when they were younger that no longer existed, that were underwater. And so when we're talking about resilience, you know, I think that it is important for us that environmental justice and resilience go hand in hand when we're talking about where people are going to live, when we're talking about more people moving inland because of coastal erosion, when we're talking about extreme weather patterns that we are seeing, and extreme climate differences that we're seeing. And there's a difference between, you know, natural climate change in the history of the world and the rapid way that climate has been and is changing, that is directly due to human interference and human interaction. And so when I'm thinking about, you know, final thoughts, or, you know, how my connection to my identity shapes the work that I do in communities, it's very interesting to me to think about the way that the environmental movement and the environmental justice movement has laid out now. You know, I talked a little bit in the beginning about, you know, how our ancestors have always been sustainable, have always been connected to the earth. And I think that the way that the movement has been laid out prior to very recently, is, you know, very, you know, I have to say it, very white, not very, you know, not a lot of people of color at the helm of organizations, not a lot of women of color or gender non-binary people of color at the helm of organizations. And that's shifting a bit. But I always say, you know, if folks of color, if people from these types of communities are not at the helm of the work that you're doing and you want to do environmental justice, you are not doing it correctly. Those are the folks that know that they experience it. They've experienced it in their towns. I was talking about my own history a little bit. You know, I didn't necessarily know that the paint factory in Newark, New Jersey was contributing to people's either respiratory issues or other issues that kids were dealing with. The lead pipe situation is just as bad, if not worse, in Newark than it is in Flint. And so I think that as we're thinking about resilience, and as we're thinking about our communities, and as we're thinking about what do we want the movement to look like, and how are we resilient, and how are we more sustainable, I think listening to the voices of the people that are the most impacted, the most affected, that are affected and impacted right now is so important. And knowing that, you know, really recently, and then I'll close here, I think with the new wave of, you know, wanting to include voices of color more, which I'm happy to see. Also understanding that that has to be genuine, that can't be a tokenizing situation, but really a genuine input from those communities, authentic input, bringing those communities to the table, going to the table that they've already built and not creating new tables and thinking that they need our help, but really wanting to know, how do we help? And if there isn't synergy, that's fine, we support you from afar. But if there is synergy, how can we prop up the work that you're already doing? So I'll close there by just saying, you know, I think that conversations like this are so important, and I'm glad that these questions are being asked and we're discussing them.
No, thank you for that answer. Great. So Dana, how about you on a wrap up? Anamarie, and then Gwen will have the last. She had the first word and she'll have the last before Courtney and Carol. So Dana.
So yes, I'll be very succinct because I feel like Eriqah gave me a good segue where, you know, I feel like environmental justice and climate justice are inextricably related. I don't think there's really any argument there. But when I talk about capacity building, and I'll also just bring in my public health hat, my public health perspective and lens, if we can focus on the society that needs, that's like the needs of the least of us, and from a health equity perspective, there's no reason that we shouldn't be able to find solutions where we can all come out on top. And because health is something that's really a shared value, and whether we acknowledge this or not, what connects us to one another is our health. And it also this highlights the role that we all play as individuals in ensuring the health for all of us. And if it's not more it's not more of a glaring example when we think about COVID and the efforts that relate to this, that to the reducing the spread of the virus. This is just one great representation of how, if we can highlight the importance of the needs of those that are most impacted, and then we could actually alleviate many things, or we could make it a better community for us. I mean, and that's really bright thinking, but I also think that when we talk about resilience, including and even uplifting those that are in these communities, those that are on the fence line, those that where these are the folks that I feel like can benefit most from capacity building efforts and benefit most from when researchers can reorient their perspective and how they're engaging with communities. And that's, I guess that's where I'll end. I really want to drive home the importance of being intentional, the importance of centering community and centering community needs, and uplifting the lived experiences of those that already reside in these places that are experiencing many of the inequities that we see today.
Yeah, thank you for that. And the centrality of health and health issues to all of that. Thank you so much for that. Anamarie.
Yes, just kind of on point with what Dana and Eriqah mentioned. I want to bring back what I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation around the population, global population, and how 20% of the global population makes 80% of the impacts compared to 80% of the population, which would be the majority world, who make up only about 20% of the impacts on climate. And with that decentering the minority world, so the minority world being countries in Europe as well as the United States, in comparison to the majority world, which would be countries in Africa, countries in Central America, countries in South America, and countries in Asia. These areas have the highest population of people. And if they are centered in their ways of living, we could see a larger change as it relates to climate change, because there's a higher population of people. Two, these people are, because they're in what people define as an underdeveloped situation, they're usually having to design and create logics of organizing societies in a very informal way. And so you can see that in the ways that they deal with trash in informal ways, or the ways that they have to figure out and determine means for food in very informal ways. And so as we decenter the developed world, as we decenter Europe and the United States, and say, well, how do we make sure that the people that live in some of the highest populated spaces, China, India, Nigeria, is on the rise as far as population goes, if we can center those spaces and say, how do we solve for creating a livable society in those spaces first, and a livable society that is non-extractive, is regenerative, right? So we're talking about solar or wind powered energy to be able to supply that to these large populations that are booming. Then we can get to and start to think about places like the United States and other countries in Europe who are more affluent, but their populations are less. And also they can problem solve much quicker because they have the finances to do so, versus if we were to center first and think about those communities that are most vulnerable to the climate impacts, whether it's heat island impacts or coastal loss of living areas and cities. And we're seeing that not only in the global South or the majority world in these other countries, we can see that here in the United States as we look at the South, and the United States South being the gateway to the global South. So right. Those are just some things that are coming to me as far as addressing environmental justice, is the decentering of the minority world.
Thank you so much. Wow, these are powerful closing statements. Gwen gets a quick minute of us closing, and then we're going to turn it over to Courtney and Carol.
I'm going to take 30 seconds just to quickly say education equity is important, which if you're going to get to green economy and being concerned about climate change, education equity, and also in terms of research, not extraction, constantly extracting. We need to also have some deposits. And for me, that means making children also authors and community members authors in academic research and communities. I'm done. Thank you.
No, that's great. Restorative, right, instead of extractive. So, all right. Well, on behalf of the panel, thanks for having us all here. And Courtney and Carol, close us out, right?
Yes, I just want to thank the panel for coming together the way you have to discuss these important matters. A couple of weeks ago, Gwen, myself, Carol, and some others were thinking about what would this panel be? Who would be on the panel? What would be the topic of discussion? And Mother Universe has directed us to pull together a wonderful group of people with a very poignant description of where we need to go in the future. So I'll turn it over to Carol to close. And once again, thank you, Eriqah, Dr. Williamson, Anamarie, and Gwen. Thank you so much, Susan, for moderating the panel as well.
Thank you so much, Courtney, and to all of you for participating today. And I come more from the lens of education, and some of the sessions we're going to have in a few weeks are, how adult learners can learn from their cell phones because they don't have the technology. And this is one of the things we learned about the last year of all the different things that people don't have in different situations that are access to education and other kinds of learning that could get them into sustainable jobs or into a housing or transportation situation that can allow these other things to happen. But it was incredible to hear your perspectives and the kinds of things you shared. And Gwen, just adult student, that, I just feel like that there's so many threads of this that go into empowering people from wherever they're starting from. And I just want to say on behalf of AJ's sessions tomorrow, which is the second part of this series. And so Gwen has been working with her group as well. And she's got some incredible leaders representing a lot of the Indigenous folks from around the world. But we really believe we can't move these big levers if we're not really working in different ways with uncommon collaborators. And that's getting to know each other in ways that are just not the usual from before the pandemic started, and the hundreds of years of racism and all kinds of injustice can be overturned when we're working very differently than the kinds of things that have gone on in the past. So thank you all so much. And I want to say that in June 2022, we hope you can all come live to Denver, meet each other, that we could all be with each other. And in the meantime, we hope that if you're working with students, that we have a daily newsletter. We'd love to profile you all in that newsletter because it's all about role models who have done amazing things, as each of you have. And students need to see themselves in people like you. So we'll look forward to following up on other things, and hope you all will join us tomorrow for the second part of how environmental justice and equity can help solve the climate crisis. And thanks again, Courtney, for just reaching out and putting Gwen together with us that resulted in everybody else here. And just so proud of all of you, and the opportunity, especially at a time like this, for us to be authentic with each other on the really hard won things that each of you guys have been able to do. And to realize that, none of us are perfect people. We're not living in perfect situations, but we can rise above that when we're all locking arms to support each other. So thank you for everything. And it's just been incredible spending time with you all, and hope to see you all tomorrow. And we'll follow up in other ways to get your brilliance connected with our emerging leaders, who are a lot of the people in your feedback loops. But we can really, I think, force multiply those incredible young people, and then learners of all ages to have input in what we're doing. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
You.
Okay, thank you.
So great to
you.
see you all. And thanks to
Take
everyone
care.
who attended.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
bet.
Goodbye.